mentioned, my name is John Caucis, and I am the Director of the Federal IT Research Practice here at Technology Business Research, or TBR, and joining me today is James Wichert, our lead Federal IT Analyst. We will be your presenters today. Our agenda for today will be to talk about the impact, first, of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, on the federal IT market, how the actions of DOGE have impacted particularly civilian spend, and in particular around consulting services, and then the shifts in strategy or the opportunities for federal systems integrators and their partners that are emerging. After a 4-year bull market featuring unprecedented spending growth in federal IT, the recently inaugurated Trump administration and DOGE, its Department of Government Efficiency, have generated substantial upheaval across the board in the federal technology sector. As of today, thousands of contracts described by DOGE as, quote, non-mission critical, unquote, have been canceled, including many across the federal IT and professional services landscape. The initial contract terminations fell disproportionately on smaller scale programs, many of which were held by small service-disabled veteran-owned vendors, though the leading federal systems integrators, or FSIs, were not spared either. Many FSIs, particularly those that utilize an advisory or a consulting-led go-to-market approach in the federal technology market, suffered program cancellations or drawdowns as DOGE conducted contract reviews. TBR agrees with the notion that the federal government must enhance efficiencies and use information technology, particularly emerging digital technologies, to drive cost-effective operations. We estimate that federal agencies are collectively spending over $100 billion every year on systems that are often not interoperable or in desperate need of modernization. The initial weeks of the Trump administration and the actions of the DOGE Advisory Board, however, cast the federal sector into chaos. Federal technology vendors scrambled to adjust their strategies and tactics to align with the market, which was quickly shifting under their feet. Initially, however, DOGE failed to provide sufficient clarity to industry regarding how it would evaluate the merit of federal contracts, making effective strategic planning for the FSIs nearly impossible. In today's webinar, we will summarize how DOGE impacted the FSIs tracked by TBR and how the federal IT community responded to the DOGE-driven challenges, how they are positioning themselves to deflect near-term disruptions and capture future opportunities, and what those future opportunities will be. As I mentioned, immediately after taking office in January of this year, the Trump administration's Department of Government Efficiency began reviewing existing IT and professional services contracts and implementing aggressive cost cuts, which impeded overall sector growth, which is illustrated on the graphic on screen. And I'll take a moment to orient everyone to the graphic here. TBR currently tracks a revenue base in federal information technology spending of over $18 billion on a quarterly basis as of the first calendar quarter of this year, or aggregated up on an annual basis over $72 billion. We follow 11 leading federal systems integrators, or FSIs. The growth illustrated here are 3 measures of revenue expansion for the companies tracked in TBR's federal IT services benchmark, all on a weighted average basis. We calculate the weighted average year-to-year growth for the benchmark firms on a statutory as well as a trailing 12-month basis, and we also provide an average of organic growth, which is growth net of acquisitions. The turbulence from DOGE manifested predominantly in the civilian sector in the first calendar quarter of this year, where literally thousands of ongoing programs were terminated or scaled back, causing a precipitous deceleration in civil sector growth. And we'll illustrate that in a moment. That impact on the civil sector, though, did flow through to the growth in the overall sector, which is illustrated here. DOGE had a negative impact on civil award activity, the pace of new bookings in civil agencies, and run rates on ongoing civilian engagements. We observed contract furloughs or drawdowns across the entire sector, but in particular at the Departments of the Treasury, Education, Interior, Transportation, the Department of Homeland Security, Health and Human Services, Social Security, and the Department of Agriculture. This impacted the benchmark vendors, including Booz Allen Hamilton, Leidos, CGI Federal, and SAIC. The Trump administration's elimination of the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, also created large revenue gaps at several vendors, including Deloitte Consulting, ICF International, and IBM Consulting. Awards of all sizes were terminated or scaled down, though some large-scale strategic modernization programs remained essentially untouched. Agencies have also become less amenable to signing renewals in favor of bridge contracts to continue existing work. In terms of the types of services that DOGE appeared to be targeting, these were mostly advisory in nature. For example, communication services, professional support services or professional management support services, financial and technical support services, program management, management consulting services, which is very broadly defined by the federal government, or strategic organizational transformation and mission support services. Some of the affected services are typically part of the, call it, upfront consulting phase of a digital transformation engagement, which involves road mapping the digital modernization path and organizational risk management services. TBR also noted other types of advisory services were impacted, including employee experience support services, portfolio management services, communication support services, asset management and property management services, and talent development solutions. While civil sector growth slowed sharply, the pace of new IT outlays and volumes on existing programs in the Department of Defense, or the DoD, and the intelligence community were relatively unimpeded, though even there, some more traditional consulting programs were sacked. Overall, however, vendors with large footprints in the Department of Defense and the intelligence community were largely unaffected. This was especially true at contractors like CACI. This was also true at Leidos, General Dynamics Technologies, and SAIC. Booz Allen's defense unit, which constitutes 50% of the firm's revenue, continues to grow at a robust pace, while their civil business is expected to contract in the next fiscal year. We anticipate turmoil will persist through the remainder of federal fiscal 2025, which ends on September 30th of this year. But the new administration promises a renewed focus on digitally transforming agency missions and operations by federal fiscal year 2026. And with that, I'm going to hand the presentation to James, who will talk about the shift that we've observed in federal information technology spending patterns. James?
Thank you, John. So, looking at shifting federal IT spending patterns, we anticipate a longer-term trend in federal IT that will impact the way future IT and professional services engagements are structured. Federal IT contractors should expect a general shift away from cost-plus to fixed price, or outcome-based contract arrangements during Trump 2.0. We also anticipate federal agencies will adopt a more outcome-focused mindset regarding new IT outlays, driven by DOGE. When the federal IT procurement environment begins focusing more on outcome-based contracting, it will shift more risk of cost overruns or delivery delays to the vendors, of potentially margin erosive scenarios for FSIs who fail to maintain strong program execution. Now, several contractors have expressed confidence that they can adapt to a shift towards outcome-focused contracting in federal IT, but they are uncertain how quickly the transition will take. So as we look at the shifting federal spending patterns, I think it's worth looking at ICF and how they're being affected and how they'll adjust, as they've probably been one of the most negatively impacted vendors by DOGE and the Trump administration's shifting priorities year to date. Just looking at 1Q25, ICF's revenue from the U.S. federal government plummeted 12.6% year to year and 7% sequentially to $239.6 million. Contract terminations and stop work orders have surged, upending around $115 million of ICF's fiscal year 25 revenues as of May 1st and $375 million of its backlog. Solicitations and award activity also started slowing down during this time period as DOGE started assessing contracts, causing ICF's pipeline of opportunities to contract from $11.2 billion in 4Q24 to $10.5 billion in 1Q25. Now, a big part of this decline was actually due to the hit to ICF's programmatic side of its business, which is stuff like program management, consulting, and engineering services. The Trump administration is taking aim at this type of work and deeming it non-essential. ICF's IT modernization work had actually not experienced any substantial disruptions as of May 1st, just that slowdown in solicitation and award activity. So that shows that IT modernization spending is not currently being singled out and slashed, which makes sense as DOGE's goals are to increase the efficiency of agencies. And since mass headcount reductions are planned, yeah, you need to keep supporting IT modernization, especially if you want to embed AI into agency systems, which they do. The Trump administration is, however, taking aim at federal civilian agencies like USAID, broadly trying to pull back on all of their spending. It's this federal civilian market where we've seen the most disruption and where DOGE has placed the bulk of its intense scrutiny on contracts. It looks like disruptions in this space will continue into federal fiscal year 2026, as the Trump administration's recent skinny budget proposal suggests that non-defense spending will fall about 23% from around $720 billion in federal fiscal year 2025. Now, it's possible we could see some disruption in federal IT spending for particular agencies, but not on the whole. Like I mentioned earlier, what we will likely see is a pivot more towards fixed price and outcome-based contracts in the next few years, as it's the Trump administration's preferred way of doing business. At least 50% of ICF's IT modernization and digital transformation engagements are already under these types of contracts. Many other vendors are in a similar boat and have all signaled that they will lean into these opportunities. I'd also expect that we see ICF and its peers explore ways to make their IT modernization and transformation work more agile, while developing ways to demonstrate that they can help the government crack down on fraud, waste, and abuse. Additionally, they'll try to capitalize on newer opportunities like the Make America Healthy Again initiatives. Other vendors like Peraton and Mantech, they'll do these things while also leaning further into the defense market, given the lack of disruptions in that space, and with its budget unlikely to be touched. In fact, defense spending could surpass $1 trillion in federal fiscal year 2026 if the reconciliation bill is approved. Now, looking at implications for FSI's partnership ecosystems, if the Trump administration falls through on its promise to lean heavily on digital technologies, particularly as technologies developed and refined in the commercial markets, it will pressure the FSIs to optimize their partnerships with commercially focused technology peers. TBR believes that this will extend across the entire breadth of information and communication technologies, which includes AI, Gen AI, agentic AI, big data, cybersecurity, cloud computing, hardware, and 5G or 6G. We believe having robust and well-managed partnerships with the cloud hyperscalers and the cloud platform providers will be particularly important, as agencies will need to heavily leverage cloud technologies to realize the administration's efficiency mandates. We anticipate accelerating activity and new opportunities will emerge to move agencies off of mainframe computers and onto the cloud. And just building off of that, I wanted to touch on GDT, as they've been really ramping up their alliance activity recently. For a while, they were falling behind on the curve when it came to announcing partnerships. When GDIT debuted their technology investment strategy in May of 2023, a big part of their multi-pronged plan was expanding their R&D lab network to help spur on collaborations with commercial technology partners like AWS that can expand the reach and capabilities of their digital accelerators, which, for those unfamiliar, they are Comet 5G, Coral Software Factory, Cove AI Operations, Eclipse Defensive Cyber, Ember Digital Engineering, Everest Zero Trust, Hive Hybrid Multi-Cloud, Luna AI, and Tide Post-Quantum Cryptography. Alliance activity noticeably ramped up beginning in the back half of 2024, with GDIT announcing a plethora of new partnerships like GitLab and integrating its AI-powered DevSecOps platform with GDIT's Coral Software Factory digital accelerator to add automation features that expedite the application development process for agencies while bolstering security. This uptick in alliance activity has continued into 2025, with GDIT announcing in 1Q25 that they are helping provide agencies with AWS cloud services, as well as generative AI solutions like Amazon Bedrock. The two will also produce new scalable AI, cybersecurity, as well as cloud migration and modernization offerings meant to boost the efficiency of clients. I fully expect that GDIT will continue to leverage their partners to augment their portfolio of digital accelerators. These accelerators went from being responsible for around $2 billion to $2.5 billion worth of contracts won during 2023 to generating nearly $7.5 billion in awards during 2024. And we'll see GDIT's peers increasingly utilize their partners to keep innovating with emerging technologies. Now, shifting over to long-term strategy and opportunities, there are three areas ripe for disruption during Trump 2.0. Legacy system modernization vis-a-vis digital transformation, call center modernization with automation and AI, and the rollout of agentic AI to enable automation across the federal sector. FSIs will need to ensure that their agency clients are prepared to have conversations with technologists about all three of these areas. After the initial disruption from DOGE, we anticipate the Trump administration's focus on modernization and efficiency will generate a groundswell of new modernization activity by federal fiscal year 2026. Between now and then, FSIs and their partners must be able to demonstrate their solutions will generate a positive ROI for agencies on an abbreviated timeline. Yeah, perhaps even 12 to 18 months. Now, I actually think Maximus is one of the vendors in a decent position to capitalize on these opportunities, given how they've been relatively unfazed by all the uncertainties in the federal market. Just $4 million of Maximus's fiscal year 25 revenue had been negatively impacted by DOGE's actions as of their last earnings call in May. Maximus's U.S. Federal Services segment has continued to rapidly expand, generating $778 million in revenue during 1Q25. It is a 10.9% improvement on a year-to-year basis, and it's entirely organic. U.S. Federal Services operating margin also kept improving as it expanded 340 basis points year-to-year and 260 basis points sequentially to 15.3% in 1Q25. These robust top and bottom line expansions were driven primarily by volume growth on clinical assessments. Maximus has seen a steady increase in demand for medical disability exam services since the PACT Act was passed. They've been incorporating productivity enhancing tools like AI to underpin this type of work so that they can take on higher volumes while relying less on temporary contract workers. Maximus are overall in a better position than when the Trump administration first took charge in 2017. They have significantly expanded their capabilities, their breadth, and their scale. While Maximus processes these clinical assessments for the VA and supports CMS's multi-billion-dollar contact center operations contract, they've been building out their existing relationships with clients into more lucrative opportunities like systems integration and digital transformation work. It's also worth mentioning that Maximus has seen the bipartisan support for federal agencies to augment their citizen-facing services and unveiled the Maximus Total Experience Management Solution in 2024 to gain traction with the Federal Reserve System, as well as other agencies making these investments. Maximus will likely stay shielded from the worst of DOGE's disruptions, given the bipartisan support for Maximus's critical citizen services like the CCO and MDE work, which generate a substantial portion of their revenue. And given that part of DOGE's stated goals is to modernize agencies' systems and streamline processes, Maximus can showcase how their technologies are reducing the amount of time needed to deliver critical citizen services without negatively impacting CX. Additionally, Maximus can leverage the case studies illustrating how the company's digital transformation as well as modernization services have positioned agencies for success and put them on a path to responsibly utilize AI. Maximus's leadership team recently disclosed that the vendor is currently discussing with clients and even DOGE representatives on how to make processes across the government more efficient. We talked earlier about how partnerships will be crucial. And yeah, Maximus seems to maybe be on the mend regarding that front. They've historically been quiet on alliance activity, but they recently announced a partnership with Salesforce to augment their CX as a service efforts. The Maximus Total Experience Management solution is being enhanced with the Agentforce platform to provide clients with AI agents tailored to their needs that use data to adapt to citizens' requests and simplify interactions. Maximus is also one of the vendors eyeing M&A activity to bolster their operations, despite the ongoing uncertainty. And, Maximus won't make any blockbuster moves like when they acquired Veteran Evaluation Services in 2021 to rapidly expand their clinical assessments business and their relationship with the VA, but they will explore tuck-in acquisitions that can strengthen their capabilities with emerging technologies and their presence in core markets like the health sector. Maximus's venture capital arm will also be a way for them to make investments in small companies that fit this criteria. Now, with all that being said, that takes us to the Q&A session. Now, all right. We already have one question. So someone wrote, what about Peraton? Anything we should watch out for with them? So Peraton is a private company, which, yes, we do cover them. It just means they're a little less open on details like backlog, booking, and of course on how DOGE has affected them. But yes, we have been able to get some insights on them. Regarding disruptions from DOGE, those have actually been very minimal. We use a tool that tracks contract terminations and disruptions from DOGE. And last I checked, it had only found one contract canceled, and it was pretty small. Like it was worth less than $10 million. It was something about providing the CDC with, I think, computer systems design services. Like Mantech, Peraton were added to that expanded list of consultants under scrutiny by the GSA. But the bigger question becomes, well, what is consulting to the GSA? Like, because Peraton isn't a straightforward consult. There have also been layoffs going around, the federal sphere, and Peraton, they're not immune as the risks mount. They recently laid off over 100 people in Maryland supporting it's like $360 million environmental test integration 3 contract with NASA, which, that was set to be recompeted later in 2025. I'd say that was more being proactive than anything, but I do think that reinforces my belief that Peraton and Mantech as well will pivot back to their DoD and IC client base by leveraging the demand for cybersecurity, R&D, IT modernization, data analytics, systems engineering, cloud, and electronic warfare capabilities. The DoD and the IC are just less prone to disruption, and recently we were seeing Peraton's publicly booked revenue already skew more to the defensive side, something like 60% defense, whereas previously we had felt that it was closer to 50-50. I still think that they could generate more than $8 billion in total revenue during 2025. They're focusing on the right spots, and they're being very careful to really avoid drawing the Trump administration's ire. Like they quietly removed their DEI officer from their corporate leadership page as the Trump administration looks to root out all DEI related policies from the federal government. I will say, I don't think Peraton are going public anytime soon now while they navigate these changes, which, that may be good as it helps them spare them from the quarterly earnings clock. And they could even start poaching high value workers with security clearances, as well as insights and ties with key agencies as their peers and agencies make layoffs. I hope that answered your question.
Great. Thanks, James. We have another question that just came through on Booz Allen Hamilton, what the impact will be on the vendor that is considered by many to be the most venerable consulting-led vendor in the federal IT market. But I would say based on their most recent earnings, they might be the most vulnerable. According to the DOGE tracker site that James mentioned that he and I have been leveraging to follow the impact on the benchmark vendors, most recently, our most recent look at that site had Booz Allen had about 22 contracts worth just under $150 million terminated. The largest being a $30 million award for clinical trial reporting software implementation at the Department of the Interior, and a $24 million award for data transparency services at USA Spending, for the USA Spending portal, at the Department of Treasury. The remaining cancellations were rather small in value, with HHS, Labor, Treasury, Commerce, Transportation, and NASA. The services involved were training, coordination, and support, operational performance, compliance management, learning management, data visualization, organizational assessment, consulting services, business process enhancement, and strategic planning. We didn't observe any impact in the fourth calendar quarter of last year on Booz sales, but that changed radically in the first calendar quarter of this year. Booz Allen just released their fiscal 25 year-end and first calendar quarter 25 earnings about 3 weeks ago. But as perhaps a harbinger of what was coming in 1Q25, we did note that the volume of disclosed deal activity plummeted during both the fourth calendar quarter of last year and the first calendar quarter of this year. One area that was particularly vulnerable, as we expected, was the firm's civil business. And within that, their high-growth healthcare business, which generates over half of their civil revenue, we estimate this to be roughly about $2.1 billion. It was on track to generate between $2.3 and $2.4 billion in fiscal 25. That $2.1 billion figure I just cited was for the prior fiscal year. But even as DOGE was upending their civil business, they didn't sit back and wait to see what would happen. They expanded their and this gets to James' earlier point about the importance of alliances. They expanded their alliance with AI and space-related partners. They also continued making joint ventures, mostly in these two areas, in the AI and space sector. They expanded their partnership with AWS. They expanded their partnership with Palantir. That caught our attention and the attention of many industry observers as well. And we can expect to see that going forward. But what we can also expect, and what is happening right now, is that Booz Allen is implementing significant furloughs. They indicated in their last earnings release that they would be cutting about 2,500 people, mostly client-facing resources, from their civilian business this quarter, the second calendar quarter of this year. So that's happening right now. They also expect that after 13 or 14 straight quarters of double-digit growth, their civil business is actually going to contract by low double digits in their fiscal 26, which began on April 1st. So that might be, Booz Allen might be the most extreme example of DOGE upending a vendor's fiscal performance. We haven't observed anything similar, with the possible exception of what James mentioned earlier with ICF. But it's going to be a very different fiscal 26 for Booz Allen than it was in fiscal 25. Thank you for the question.